The pines stood silent that spring, as if mourning. Their branches no longer danced with the wind, but bowed low with the weight of memory. Elijah sat beneath their canopy, the same clearing where Miss Trina once sat, reading poetry to him in the summers of his childhood. The envelope in his hand trembled, worn and softened at the edges, her last letter. Miss Trina had died in early March. The MS had spread mercilessly, weakening her body until it finally silenced her voice. She had written him just weeks before her passing, her handwriting more fragile than he remembered, yet still unmistakably hers. "My dear boy," it began, "you were my sunrise when the nights were long. Never doubt the light that lives in you, even when the dark calls you by name." Elijah folded the letter slowly, his breath catching on the last sentence. He had felt her slipping away over the past year, the phone calls growing shorter, her voice thinner. But the finality of her absence sank in like winter frost, slow, bitter, unrelenting. The grief came in waves, not just for her death, but for what she represented. Safety, understanding, a piece of his soul that once knew stillness. He had cried without shame the night he got the call, Naomi holding him as though she could will the pain out of his body and into the air between them. Naomi, she had seen him in all his rawness, all his history, and still she stayed. They were married the following autumn, in a small ceremony beneath those very pines. It was quiet, intimate, filled with poetry, promises and tears. No grand procession, just truth. Naomi wore a simple ivory dress, and Elijah in a navy suit that still held the creases of his nerves. When he looked into her eyes, he saw not only love, but endurance. She had become his anchor when the sea inside him roared. A year later, they welcomed their son. They named him Trin in honor of the woman who had first taught Elijah that love could be soft and still powerful. The moment Elijah held Trin in his arms, a mix of awe and fear gripped him so tightly he thought he might crumble. The baby's tiny fists balled against his chest, a living pulse of hope nestled in the space where Elijah's old pain had once thrived. But fatherhood, like healing, was not linear. There were days when Elijah couldn't breathe from the sheer magnitude of love he felt for his son. And then there were days when the past stalked him like a shadow, whispering the voices of those who once told him he was broken, unworthy. Those voices returned when Trin cried uncontrollably, when Elijah couldn't soothe him, when Naomi's calm presence only reminded him of his own inadequacies. Naomi remained his compass. She reminded him to breathe when his mind spiraled. She reminded him to step away, to count the seconds between his heartbeats. "You are not your past," she would whisper as she held his trembling hands. But sometimes her words would dissolve against the wall of his panic. One such night carved itself into their lives like a scar. Trin was 3 and had begun throwing tantrums that shook the house. Elijah had been working late, the deadline for his next novel looming. The baby monitor crackled with Trin's cries, long and piercing, and something inside Elijah snapped. The toddler froze, eyes wide, his small body flinching instinctively. Naomi rushed in seconds later, placing herself between father and son. The room went still, the air cold. Trin had stopped crying, but he didn't run into Elijah's arms the way he used to. That night, Elijah sat in the dark, knees pulled to his chest, whispering apologies no one could hear. He felt sick, physically ill with guilt. The cycle had tried to continue through him, and he had let it. The next morning, Trin wouldn't look at him. In the weeks that followed, Elijah withdrew. Naomi encouraged therapy again, and he agreed, not because he wanted to be fixed, but because he had to learn, how to stop history from repeating itself. Trauma, his new therapist said, is like a river. If left unchecked, it carves valleys into the next generation. Trin had inherited Elijah's sensitivity. They saw it in the way he recoiled at loud noises, how he clung to books and silence, how he stared too long out of windows, as if searching for something lost. He was imaginative, expressive, but easily overwhelmed. At daycare, he was often found curled up alone with a toy or picture book while the other kids shrieked and played. The signs were subtle at first, but Naomi saw them, and so did Elijah. They attended parenting classes. They learned about emotional regulation, about repair after rupture. They practiced validating Trin's feelings instead of dismissing them. Elijah learned how to kneel and apologize, to make eye contact and say, "Daddy was wrong." Yet the guilt lingered. One evening, after Trin had fallen asleep, Elijah stood at the edge of their yard, beneath a deep navy sky. Naomi joined him, her hands slipping into his without a word. Elijah admitted, "I'm terrified." What if I pass it all down? All of it, the rage, the shame, the fear. We don't get to choose our wounds, but we do get to choose how we heal. And Trin, he sees that. He sees you trying. But is trying enough? For a boy who was once convinced he'd never make it past 20, trying is a revolution. In time, Trin began to trust again. He would reach for Elijah's hand during walks. He started crawling into bed with them during thunderstorms, whispering, "Daddy, protect me from the loud." Always. They started a new tradition, quiet mornings, just the two of them with cocoa, books and long conversations about imaginary worlds. In those moments, Elijah saw the power of repair, not perfection, but progress. Still, there were days when the silence between the pines called to him, when Miss Trina's voice echoed in the branches, reminding him that healing was not about erasing the past, but growing roots through it. On Trin's 4th birthday, they visited the clearing together. Naomi watched from a distance as father and son sat beneath the trees, their matching curls catching the golden light. Miss Trina loved this place, Elijah told his son. "Is she in the sky now?" Trin asked. "Maybe," Elijah said softly, "or maybe she's in you, in your kindness, in your strength." "I'm strong like you, Daddy." Stronger. And in that silence, Elijah felt something shift. A loop closing, a cycle interrupted. Not broken entirely, not yet, but splintered enough for light to get through. Trauma is not just a wound, it is a language. Passed down, often unspoken, it lives in the clenched jaw of a child, the wary glance, the flinch at raised voices. But healing too can be inherited, in lullabies and bedtime stories, in apologies and open arms. Elijah would never be flawless, he would stumble, but he had learned that love was not the absence of pain, it was what you built in its aftermath. A bridge, a tree, a boy who knew his father's arms were a place of safety even after the storms. And in the quiet between the pines where shadows once loomed, laughter now echoed. A son chasing butterflies, a father watching with tearful joy. and somewhere in the rustling leaves the voice of a woman long gone, whispering,